The morning mist clung to the ancient oak trees surrounding St. Teresa of Avila Convent in Willowbrook Springs, Vermont, as it had for over a century. But on September 15, 1984, the peaceful silence that typically embraced this sacred place was shattered by an absence so profound that it would echo through 4 decades of unanswered prayers and sleepless nights. Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield, identical twins who had devoted their lives to serving God, had vanished without a trace during the night, leaving behind only their neatly folded habits on their dormitory beds and a community of sisters whose faith would be tested in ways they never imagined possible. Catherine Rose and Margaret and Thornfield had been born on a snowy December morning in 1956 to Eleanor and Robert Thornfield, a devout Catholic family in nearby Maple Ridge Township. From their earliest days, the twins were inseparable, sharing not only identical features but also an identical devotion to their faith that amazed everyone who knew them. Those girls were born with halos, their childhood pastor, Father Michael O'Sullivan, often remarked. Even as toddlers, they would sit perfectly still during Mass, their little hands folded in prayer, their eyes fixed on the altar with an understanding that seemed far beyond their years. Eleanor Thornfield, a gentle woman with auburn hair and kind green eyes, had always known her daughters were special. She would find them at dawn, kneeling beside their shared bed, whispering prayers they had somehow learned without being taught. When other children their age were playing with dolls, Catherine and Margaret were caring for injured birds and stray cats, nursing them back to health with a tenderness that spoke of divine calling. "Mama," 5-year-old Catherine had said one morning while helping Eleanor tend their family garden, "Margaret and I dreamed about Jesus last night. He told us we're supposed to take care of his people when we grow up." Margaret, who rarely spoke unless Catherine had spoken first, nodded solemnly. "He said we're going to live in a special house where ladies pray all day and help sick people get better." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride and a touch of prophetic sadness. She sensed that God had plans for her daughters that would take them far from the comfortable family home in Maple Ridge, but she also felt the unmistakable presence of divine blessing on their young lives. Robert Thornfield, a quiet man who worked as a carpenter for the local lumber mill, often watched his daughters with wonder and concern. He would find them kneeling in the family garden at dawn, their small hands clasped in prayer as they faced the rising sun. "Eleanor," he would whisper to his wife as they observed from the kitchen window, "sometimes I feel like we're raising little saints. It fills me with pride, but also with fear. Saints often suffer in this world." The twins' extraordinary behavior continued to manifest in countless small ways throughout their childhood. When Catherine was 7 years old, she insisted on giving her birthday money to a homeless man she had seen outside the church. When Margaret was 8, she spent an entire afternoon caring for a wounded sparrow, singing hymns to the tiny creature until it was strong enough to fly away. Their teacher, Mrs. Johnson, often wrote in her journal about incidents that left her speechless with wonder. March 15, 1965, today during art class, I asked the children to draw pictures of their families. Most children drew stick figures of their parents and siblings. Catherine and Margaret both drew elaborate scenes of their family gathered around a large table with what appeared to be many other people. When I asked who the extra people were, Catherine said, "Those are the angels, Mrs. Johnson. They eat dinner with us every night." Margaret nodded seriously and added, "Sometimes they help Mama with the dishes." I didn't know how to respond to such innocent faith. The twins' relationship with each other was unlike anything their parents or teachers had ever witnessed. They seemed to communicate without words, often finishing each other's sentences or responding to needs that hadn't been verbally expressed. When one twin was hurt or upset, the other would immediately appear to offer comfort, even from across a room or playground. This supernatural connection extended to their spiritual lives as well. Father O'Sullivan often spoke about the profound impact the twins had on their parish community. During Mass, when other children their age were fidgeting or whispering, Catherine and Margaret would sit perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the altar with an intensity that was almost mystical. I noticed that other children began to behave better simply by watching the twins' example. They were evangelizing without saying a word. As the twins grew older, their calling to religious life became increasingly apparent. At age 12, they began attending daily Mass, walking the mile to church each morning before school and returning each evening for additional prayers. They started a prayer group for their classmates, teaching other children how to pray the rosary and leading them in songs of praise. The twins excelled in school, not just academically but in their relationships with teachers and classmates. Margaret Elizabeth Johnson, their third-grade teacher at Sacred Heart Elementary, kept detailed journals about her students throughout her 40-year career, and her entries about the Thornfield twins were filled with wonder. September 12, 1964, Catherine and Margaret Thornfield continue to amaze me. Today during recess, instead of playing on the swings, they sat with Sarah Patterson, who was crying because the other children were teasing her about her worn-out shoes. By the end of recess, Catherine had organized a buddy system, where each child was paired with another to make sure no one felt left out. Margaret had given Sarah her own hair ribbon and convinced her that being different made her special in God's eyes. These girls have the hearts of saints. As the twins entered their teenage years, their calling became even more pronounced. While their classmates at Willowbrook Springs High School were focused on dating, parties, and college applications, Catherine and Margaret spent their free time volunteering at the local hospital, reading to elderly patients and helping nurses with menial tasks. Dr. William Harrison Beck, the chief of staff at Willowbrook General Hospital, became like a grandfather figure to the twins during their volunteer years. He watched them transform from earnest 14-year-olds into young women whose compassion and spiritual maturity impressed even the most seasoned medical professionals. "I've been practicing medicine for 35 years, Dr. Beck told Eleanor Thornfield during a chance encounter at the grocery store in 1972, and I can honestly say I've never seen anything like your daughters. Yesterday, I watched Margaret spend 2 hours sitting with Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore, an elderly woman who hasn't spoken to anyone in months due to her dementia. Margaret just sat there, holding her hand and humming hymns. Suddenly, Mrs. Whitmore looked up and said, 'Are you an angel?' Margaret smiled and said, 'No, ma'am, but Jesus sent me to remind you that he loves you.' Mrs. Whitmore smiled for the first time in months. Dr. Beck paused, his eyes misty with emotion. And Catherine, she has this gift for knowing exactly what patients need before they even ask. She seems to anticipate pain, fear, loneliness. It's not medical training, it's something much deeper. Something spiritual. When the twins announced their intention to enter religious life immediately after high school graduation, no one in their family or community was surprised. What did surprise everyone was their decision to join the Daughters of Divine Mercy, a cloistered order known for their work with the dying and their commitment to perpetual prayer. Most young women entering religious life today choose active orders where they can teach or do social work, explained Mother Superior Teresa Magdalene when the twins first visited St. Teresa of Avila Convent in the spring of 1974. Our life is one of prayer, silence, and service to those approaching death. It requires tremendous spiritual maturity and emotional strength. Catherine and Margaret exchanged one of their characteristic wordless communications, a glance that conveyed volumes of shared understanding, before Catherine spoke for both of them. "Mother Superior, we believe God is calling us to be present for people in their most sacred moments. We want to help souls transition from this world to the next with dignity and peace." Margaret added quietly, "We've always felt that our purpose was to be bridges between earth and heaven. If that means a life of prayer and service to the dying, then that's where God wants us." The 6-month postulancy period that began in September 1974 confirmed what Mother Superior Teresa had already sensed: the Thornfield twins possessed an extraordinary spiritual calling. Sister Maria Assumpta, the novice mistress, documented their progress in her weekly reports to the Mother Superior. October 15, 1974, Catherine and Margaret continue to demonstrate remarkable spiritual maturity. During night prayers, I often find them in the chapel long after the prescribed prayer time has ended, deep in contemplation. When I asked Catherine why they stayed so long, she replied, "Mother, the souls in purgatory are asking for our prayers. We can hear them calling." When I asked Margaret what she meant, she said simply, "They're not scary or sad. They're just waiting for us to help them get home to Jesus." The twins' formal investiture as novices took place on March 19, 1975, the Feast of Saint Joseph. Eleanor and Robert Thornfield sat in the front row of the convent chapel, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughters receive their religious habits and new names, Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret. "Today our daughters died to the world and were reborn in Christ," Robert whispered to his wife as the ceremony concluded. "I'm proud of them, but I'm also grieving the grandchildren we'll never have, the family gatherings they'll miss." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "They're not lost to us, Robert. They're just living on a different plane now, closer to God. And think of all the souls they'll help reach heaven. Our daughters are going to be saints." The first decade of the twins' religious life was marked by profound spiritual growth and increasing responsibility within the convent community. By 1984, at the age of 28, both sisters had been entrusted with significant roles. Sister Mary Catherine served as assistant to the infirmarian, caring for elderly and dying sisters, while Sister Mary Margaret had become the librarian and keeper of the convent's historical records. Sister Mary Catherine had developed what the other sisters called the gift of the good death. Whenever a sister was approaching her final hours, Catherine seemed to know intuitively what was needed: a cool cloth for the forehead, a favorite hymn sung softly, or simply her quiet presence holding a trembling hand. Dying sisters often reported seeing angels in their final moments, and invariably, they would ask if Sister Mary Catherine was one of them. Sister Catherine has this way of making death feel like coming home, Sister Maria Consolata, an elderly nun who had witnessed Catherine's ministry for years, explained to the other sisters. "She never seems sad or frightened when someone is dying. Instead, she radiates this peace that seems to transform the entire room. I've seen sisters who were terrified of death become calm and even joyful when Sister Catherine was with them." Sister Mary Margaret's work in the convent library had uncovered fascinating details about the history of Saint Teresa of Avila Convent and the surrounding area. She had compiled extensive genealogical records of families in Willowbrook Springs, created detailed catalogues of the convent's manuscripts and artifacts, and developed a correspondence with historians and researchers from around the country. "Sister Margaret has a mind like a steel trap," Mother Superior Teresa often said. "She remembers every detail, every date, every story. But more than that, she understands the connections between past and present. She sees patterns that others miss." Sister Mary Margaret's exceptional intellectual gifts had made her an invaluable resource for the entire Daughters of Divine Mercy order. She corresponded regularly with convents across the country, sharing research and historical insights. Her work had uncovered the stories of dozens of sisters who had served faithfully over the decades, and she had compiled what many considered the most comprehensive history of religious life in Vermont. The convent's library under Margaret's care had become a treasure trove of spiritual and historical documents. She had catalogued over 3,000 books, including first-edition works by famous Catholic authors, handwritten manuscripts from the convent's founders, and correspondence between Mother Superiors and Vatican officials dating back to the 1890s. Scholars from universities across New England regularly requested access to the collection, and Margaret's expertise was recognized by the Catholic Historical Society. But it was Margaret's meticulous attention to detail that would ultimately lead to her and Catherine's deaths. As she prepared materials for the convent's upcoming centennial celebration, Margaret discovered that numerous historical documents referenced financial gifts and endowments that should have provided substantial ongoing income for the community. Yet the convent's current financial situation was much more precarious than these historical records suggested it should be. Catherine, Margaret had confided to her twin during one of their evening walks in the convent garden, "I've been comparing our current financial statements with historical records, and something is very wrong. Our founders left us endowments that should have grown significantly over the decades. Based on the original amounts and normal investment returns, we should have hundreds of thousands of dollars more than what's currently in our accounts." Catherine had listened with growing concern as Margaret explained her discoveries. "Have you spoken to Mother Superior about this?" "Not yet," Margaret replied. "I wanted to be absolutely certain before I raised such serious concerns. But Catherine, I've found evidence that someone has been systematically removing money from our endowment accounts. The theft has been going on for years, possibly decades. It was this gift for seeing patterns that had led Sister Mary Margaret to make some troubling discoveries in the months leading up to her disappearance. In her role as convent historian, she had access to records dating back to the founding of St. Teresa in 1889, including financial documents, correspondence with church hierarchy, and detailed accounts of daily life in the community. During the summer of 1984, while organizing documents in preparation for the convent's centennial celebration, Sister Mary Margaret had discovered inconsistencies in financial records from the 1970s and early 1980s. Large donations that had been recorded as received were not reflected in the convent's bank statements. Construction projects that had been documented as completed showed no corresponding expenditures in the financial ledgers. Sister Mary Margaret had shared her concerns with Sister Mary Catherine, as she shared everything, during their brief daily recreation period on September 10, 1984, just 5 days before their disappearance. "Catherine, I found something troubling in the financial records," Margaret had whispered as they walked together in the convent garden. "Someone has been stealing from our community. Large amounts of money, over several years." Catherine had stopped walking, her face pale with shock. "Are you certain, Margaret? Perhaps there's an innocent explanation." "I've checked and rechecked everything," Margaret replied. "The pattern is clear. And Catherine, I think I know who's responsible. The timing of the discrepancies matches exactly with certain administrative changes in our community." Catherine had glanced around nervously, ensuring they were alone among the rose bushes and herb gardens that had been their place of peaceful reflection for a decade. "What are you going to do?" "I have to report it to Mother Superior," Margaret had said firmly. "We took vows of poverty, and someone has been violating that sacred trust. The money that's been stolen was meant to care for our elderly sisters, to maintain our chapel, to support our mission of prayer and service." "When will you tell her?" Catherine had asked. "Tomorrow morning, after lauds. I've prepared a complete report with documentation. I've also written letters to the diocesan office, in case." Margaret had paused, a shadow of fear crossing her usually serene features. "In case something happens to me." Catherine had taken her twin's hand, a gesture that would have been discouraged in most circumstances but felt necessary in that moment. "Nothing will happen to you, Margaret. We're protected here. This is God's house." But Margaret had shaken her head slowly. "Catherine, the person responsible for these thefts is someone with significant authority in our community. Someone who knows our routines, our vulnerabilities. If they realize I've discovered their crimes." The conversation had been interrupted by the bell calling the sisters to Vespers, and they had not had another opportunity to speak privately before their disappearance 5 days later. The evening of September 14, 1984, had unfolded like countless others at St. Teresa of Avila Convent. The 43 sisters in residence had gathered for Vespers at 5:30 p.m., their voices blending in the ancient chants that had echoed through the chapel for nearly a century. Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret had taken their usual places in the choir stalls, their identical faces reflecting the golden light of the late afternoon sun streaming through the stained glass windows. After Vespers, the community had gathered in the refectory for their evening meal, a simple supper of vegetable soup, bread, and cheese, eaten in contemplative silence while one of the novices read aloud from the life of St. Teresa of Avila. Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret had sat at their assigned places at the third table, their movements synchronized in the way that only twins could achieve. Sister Maria Immaculata, who sat across from the twins, later recalled that both sisters had seemed unusually thoughtful during the meal. "They barely touched their food," she told investigators weeks later. Sister Margaret kept glancing toward the Mother Superior's table, and Sister Catherine kept looking at Margaret with this worried expression. But that wasn't entirely unusual, the twins had always been very attuned to each other's emotions. Following the evening meal, the sisters had proceeded to the chapel for Compline, the final prayer service of the day. Mother Superior Teresa Magdalene led the community in the ancient prayers, her strong voice guiding them through the Nunc Dimittis and the closing hymn to Our Lady. As always, the twins' voices had blended perfectly, their harmonies adding an ethereal beauty to the community's prayer. At 8:30 p.m., the great silence had begun, the period from after Compline until after morning prayers when the sisters observed complete silence except for emergencies. The community had dispersed to their individual cells for private prayer, spiritual reading, and rest. Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret shared a small dormitory room on the second floor of the convent's residential wing. Their cell was Spartan but peaceful, containing 2 narrow beds, a shared desk, a simple wooden crucifix, and a small shelf holding their personal prayer books and a few treasured family photographs. Sister Mary Bernadette, whose cell was adjacent to the twins, later reported that she had heard nothing unusual that night. The twins were always so quiet during the great silence, she explained. Sometimes I could hear them turning pages if they were doing spiritual reading, or the soft sound of kneeling if they were praying, but they were never disruptive. That night was no different, or at least, I didn't think it was different at the time. The discovery of the twins' disappearance came at 5:15 a.m. on September 15, when Sister Mary Bernadette knocked on their door to wake them for lauds and received no response. Thinking perhaps the twins were already in the chapel for private prayer before the community service, Sister Bernadette proceeded to her own morning preparations. But when the bell rang for lauds at 5:30 a.m. and Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret were not in their usual places in the choir stalls, Mother Superior Teresa knew immediately that something was wrong. In 10 years of religious life, the twins had never missed a community prayer service due to illness or any other reason. "Sister Bernadette, please check on Sisters Catherine and Margaret," Mother Superior whispered as the community began the opening psalm. Sister Bernadette hurried from the chapel to the residential wing, her heart pounding with an inexplicable sense of dread. When she opened the door to the twins' cell, she found their beds neatly made, their religious habits folded precisely on their respective chairs, and no sign of the sisters themselves. On Sister Mary Catherine's desk was her personal prayer book, open to a prayer for protection. On Sister Mary Margaret's desk was a sealed envelope marked, "For Mother Superior, to be opened only if something happens to me." Sister Bernadette's scream echoed through the convent corridors, instantly shattering the peaceful morning silence and beginning 4 decades of agonizing questions that would test the faith of everyone who loved the Thornfield twins. Within hours of the discovery, St. Teresa of Avila Convent was transformed into the center of the largest missing persons investigation in Vermont's history. State police, FBI agents, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from across New England descended on the peaceful religious community, turning the sacred silence into a cacophony of urgent voices and desperate hope. Detective Lieutenant Samuel Harrison Beck, Dr. Beck's son, who had grown up hearing stories about the remarkable Thornfield twins, led the initial investigation. At 34, Samuel had already earned a reputation as one of Vermont's most thorough and compassionate investigators, but the disappearance of 2 beloved nuns presented challenges unlike any case he had previously handled. The scene made no sense from an investigative standpoint, Lieutenant Beck explained to his partner, Detective Maria Santos, as they examined the twins' cell for the 3rd time. "There are no signs of struggle, no evidence that anyone entered this room from outside. The habits are folded as if the sisters undressed themselves and left voluntarily." But why would 2 cloistered nuns, who had devoted their lives to their community, suddenly leave in the middle of the night without a word to anyone? Detective Santos, a practicing Catholic who understood the significance of religious vows, shook her head in bewilderment. "Lieutenant, these women took solemn vows of stability. That means they promised to remain in this community for life, except in extraordinary circumstances and with permission from church authorities. For them to leave voluntarily would be like a mother abandoning her children. It goes against everything they believed in." The envelope that Sister Mary Margaret had left for Mother Superior provided the investigation's first significant clue. Inside was a detailed 3-page report documenting financial irregularities within the convent's administration, along with photocopies of bank statements, donation records, and correspondence that suggested systematic embezzlement over a period of several years. Sister Margaret discovered that someone in the convent leadership had been stealing funds intended for the care of elderly sisters, Lieutenant Beck explained to his superior, Captain Robert Stone, as they reviewed the evidence. "We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars diverted from legitimate convent operations to personal accounts. The financial investigation quickly focused on 3 individuals who had access to the convent's banking information and administrative authority: Mother Superior Teresa Magdalene, who had ultimate oversight of all financial matters, Sister Mary Frances Assisi, the convent treasurer, and Father Jonathan Whitmore, the chaplain who served as liaison between the convent and diocesan financial offices. Mother Superior Teresa, a 72-year-old woman who had served in leadership for 15 years, was devastated by the implications of Sister Margaret's report. "I trusted Sister Frances completely with our financial affairs," she told investigators through tears. "She's been our treasurer for 8 years, and I never had reason to question her work. If she was stealing from our community, then I failed in my responsibility to protect our sisters." Sister Mary Frances Assisi, born Rebecca Sullivan, was 45 years old and had been a member of the Daughters of Divine Mercy for 23 years. She had assumed the role of treasurer in 1976, at a time when the convent was struggling financially and needed someone with business experience to manage their limited resources. Sister Frances was brilliant with numbers, recalled Sister Mary Consolata during her interview with investigators. "She modernized our entire financial system, set up new banking relationships, and somehow managed to balance our budget even when donations were declining. We all thought she was a miracle worker." But Lieutenant Beck's examination of Sister Frances's background revealed troubling details that the convent leadership had either overlooked or chosen to ignore. Before entering religious life, Rebecca Sullivan had worked as an accountant for several small businesses in Burlington, Vermont. 2 of those businesses had experienced unexplained financial irregularities during her employment, though no charges had ever been filed. "The pattern is consistent with what Sister Margaret documented," Detective Santos observed as they reviewed Sullivan's employment history. "Small amounts taken over long periods, sophisticated manipulation of records to hide the theft. She's been perfecting this system for decades." Father Jonathan Whitmore, the 58-year-old chaplain, initially appeared above suspicion. A priest for 32 years, he had served St. Teresa of Avila Convent for the past 6 years and was known throughout the diocese for his holiness and dedication to religious communities. But as investigators dug deeper into the financial irregularities, they discovered that Father Whitmore had been instrumental in setting up several of the banking arrangements that Sister Margaret had identified as problematic. He had also been present for many of the meetings where major financial decisions were made, and he had access to information that could have enabled the systematic theft. Father Whitmore's involvement could explain how the embezzlement went undetected for so long, Lieutenant Beck theorized. As chaplain, he had the trust of the community and the authority to approve financial arrangements. If he was working with Sister Frances, they could have covered for each other's activities. The search for the missing twins expanded beyond financial investigation to include extensive physical searches of the convent grounds and surrounding wilderness. The Vermont State Police organized search teams that combed every inch of the 500-acre property surrounding St. Teresa of Avila Convent, including dense forests, abandoned outbuildings, and even old wells and cisterns that might have been used to conceal evidence. "We're looking for any sign that the sisters left the convent grounds," Sergeant Michael Rodriguez explained to the volunteers who had gathered to help with the search. "Footprints, torn fabric, anything that might indicate which direction they went or whether they left voluntarily or under duress." The search efforts were hampered by heavy rains that began on September 16 and continued for 3 days, washing away any potential evidence that might have been preserved in the soft earth around the convent. Bloodhounds brought in from the state police were unable to establish a clear scent trail beyond the convent buildings. Eleanor and Robert Thornfield arrived at St. Teresa of Avila Convent on September 17, their faces etched with a pain so profound that it moved even the most hardened investigators to tears. They had not seen their daughters in person for 3 years, due to the cloistered nature of the Daughters of Divine Mercy, though they had maintained regular correspondence and had spoken with them briefly during their annual Christmas phone call. "My daughters would never have left this place voluntarily," Eleanor told Lieutenant Beck with absolute certainty. "They believed God had called them here for life. Whatever happened to them, it wasn't their choice." Robert Thornfield, now graying and bearing the weight of years spent worrying about his daughter's safety in an increasingly dangerous world, was more direct in his assessment. "Someone took our girls," he said firmly. Someone who knew their routines, who knew how to get into the convent without being detected. You need to look at everyone who had access to that building, not just the sisters, but maintenance workers, delivery people, visitors. Someone betrayed the trust of this sacred place. The investigation into potential outside perpetrators revealed that St. Teresa of Avila Convent had indeed been visited by several service providers in the weeks leading up to the twins' disappearance. A heating contractor had performed routine maintenance on the building's furnaces. A delivery company had brought supplies for the convent's food pantry. Most significantly, a team of painters had been working on renovations to the convent's exterior walls throughout the month of September. The painting crew had access to the entire building, Detective Santos noted as she reviewed the work schedules. They knew the sisters' daily routines, they knew which rooms were occupied, and they had scaffolding set up that could have provided access to second-floor windows. But interviews with the painting crew members revealed nothing suspicious. All 4 workers had solid alibis for the night of September 14th to 15th, and none had criminal backgrounds or any apparent motive for harming the sisters. As September turned to October, the investigation began to focus more intensively on the financial crimes that Sister Mary Margaret had documented. The examination of banking records revealed a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that had been operating since 1978, systematically diverting funds from donation accounts into personal accounts controlled by Sister Mary Frances Assisi. Sister Frances created a parallel financial system, Lieutenant Beck explained to Mother Superior Teresa during a formal interview. Donors would send checks made out to the convent, and she would deposit them into accounts that appeared legitimate but were actually under her personal control. She then provided you with falsified statements showing smaller donation amounts, keeping the difference for herself. Mother Superior Teresa's face crumpled as she absorbed the magnitude of the betrayal. How much money are we talking about, Lieutenant? Based on our preliminary investigation, approximately $340,000 over 6 years, Beck replied gently. Money that was intended to care for your elderly sisters, to maintain your buildings, and to support your community's mission. The confrontation with Sister Mary Frances Assisi took place on October 8, 1984, in the presence of Mother Superior Teresa, Lieutenant Beck, and diocesan officials who had been called in to address the canonical implications of the crimes. Sister Frances initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the bank records and documentation that Sister Margaret had compiled, she broke down and confessed. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed, her religious habits seeming to mock the sacred vows she had broken. It started small, just a few $100s when my mother was sick and needed medical care that wasn't covered by insurance. But once I had taken the first money, it became easier to justify taking more. What happened to Sisters Catherine and Margaret? Lieutenant Beck asked directly. Did they confront you about the theft? Sister Frances's reaction was immediate and visceral. She became pale, began trembling, and seemed to struggle for breath. I don't know what happened to them, she gasped. I swear to God, I don't know. Sister Margaret had been asking questions about the financial records, but I thought I could convince her that any discrepancies were just accounting errors. Did you meet with them on September 14th? Detective Santos pressed. No, Sister Frances said firmly. I avoided them that whole week because I knew Sister Margaret was suspicious. I was planning to resign from my position as treasurer and leave the convent. I had already contacted my family about staying with them until I could figure out what to do. Despite extensive questioning, investigators could not establish any direct connection between Sister Frances's embezzlement and the twins' disappearance. She adamantly denied having any knowledge of what had happened to them, and polygraph tests supported her claims of innocence regarding their disappearance, even as they confirmed her guilt in the financial crimes. Father Jonathan Whitmore's involvement in the financial irregularities proved more complex and disturbing. Unlike Sister Frances, who had acted primarily out of personal greed and family pressure, Father Whitmore had been systematically diverting funds to support a gambling addiction that had consumed his life for over a decade. Father Whitmore had been using his position to access convent funds for gambling trips to Atlantic City, Captain Stone explained to diocesan officials during a closed-door meeting. He would take money from the accounts, gamble it away, and then manipulate the records to hide the theft. When Sister Margaret began her investigation, she was close to exposing his activities as well as Sister Francis's. The revelation that their beloved chaplain had been stealing from their community while simultaneously celebrating Mass and hearing confessions sent shockwaves through the sisters at St. Teresa of Avila Convent. Many felt that their ability to trust spiritual authority had been permanently damaged. How can we ever feel safe again? Sister Mary Consolata asked Mother Superior Teresa during a community meeting. If we can't trust our own treasurer and our chaplain, how can we trust anyone? But the question that haunted everyone was whether Father Whitmore's desperation to hide his crimes had led him to harm Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret when they threatened to expose his theft. Father Whitmore had the most to lose if the twins revealed what Sister Margaret had discovered, Lieutenant Beck told his team during a strategy meeting. A gambling priest who steals from nuns would face not only criminal charges but complete disgrace within the church. He could have panicked and done something to silence them. However, like Sister Francis, Father Whitmore denied any involvement in the sisters' disappearance. During extensive interviews, he admitted to his gambling addiction and his theft of convent funds, but maintained that he had never harmed the twins or even spoken to them about Sister Margaret's investigation. I knew Sister Margaret was asking questions, he told investigators. I was terrified that she would discover my involvement, but I never confronted her about it. I was planning to confess everything to the bishop and accept whatever punishment he deemed appropriate. As winter approached and the investigation stretched into its third month, the reality began to settle in that Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield might never be found alive. The extensive searches had yielded no trace of their whereabouts, and the financial investigation had revealed serious crimes but no definitive connection to the twins' disappearance. Eleanor and Robert Thornfield established a foundation to support the ongoing search efforts and to provide assistance to other families dealing with missing loved ones. The Catherine and Margaret Thornfield Foundation became a source of hope and resources for hundreds of families over the following decades, though the questions about their own daughter's fate remained unanswered. We refuse to give up hope, Eleanor declared during a press conference on the 6-month anniversary of the disappearance. Our daughters are somewhere, and we believe God will bring them home to us, whether in this life or the next. Until then, we will continue to pray and to help other families who are walking this same painful path. The case of the missing Thornfield twins became one of Vermont's most enduring mysteries, generating dozens of theories, hundreds of tips, and countless hours of investigation over the following decades. Some believed the twins had been murdered by someone seeking to silence their investigation into financial crimes. Others theorized that they had been kidnapped by individuals with unknown motives. A few even suggested that the twins had voluntarily left their religious life, though this theory was dismissed by everyone who knew them well. As the years passed, the case was periodically reopened whenever new evidence emerged or when advances in forensic technology offered new possibilities for investigation. But despite the efforts of multiple generations of investigators, the fate of Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield remained one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Vermont history. The impact of their disappearance extended far beyond their immediate family and religious community. The case led to significant changes in how religious communities managed their financial affairs, with new oversight requirements and transparency measures designed to prevent the kind of embezzlement that had been discovered at St. Teresa of Avila Convent. More profoundly, the twins' disappearance challenged the faith of everyone who had known them. How could God allow two such holy young women, who had dedicated their lives to serving Him, to simply vanish without explanation? The question would echo through 4 decades of prayers, tears, and desperate searching for answers that seemed as distant as heaven itself. But in 2024, exactly 40 years after that terrible September morning when 2 empty beds were discovered in a small convent cell, God would finally answer the prayers of all those who had never stopped believing that truth and justice would ultimately prevail. The renovation of St. Teresa of Avila Convent began in the spring of 2024, 40 years after the disappearance of Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield. The Daughters of Divine Mercy community, now numbering only 16 elderly sisters, had made the difficult decision to modernize their aging facility while preserving its historical character and sacred atmosphere. Mother Superior Catherine Marie Sinclair, who had been elected to leadership in 2020, was herself named in honor of Sister Mary Catherine Thornfield. Born in 1985, a year after the twins' disappearance, she had grown up hearing their story and had felt called to join the same religious community that had lost two of its most beloved members. The Thornfield twins were part of what drew me to this community, Mother Catherine explained to the renovation contractor, Benjamin Christopher Aldrich, as they walked through the convent's corridors on a bright May morning. Even though they've been gone for 40 years, their presence is still felt here. Their story of faithfulness and sacrifice continues to inspire young women to consider religious life. Benjamin Aldrich, a third-generation contractor whose grandfather had worked on various projects at St. Teresa of Avila Convent in the 1960s and 1970s, nodded respectfully. My grandfather always spoke highly of the sisters here. He said they were the kindest, most generous people he ever worked for. The disappearance of those twins was something that haunted him for the rest of his life. The renovation project was extensive, including updates to the electrical system, plumbing, heating, and structural repairs that would ensure the convent's preservation for future generations. But it was during the work on the foundation that Benjamin's crew made a discovery that would finally answer 4 decades of prayers and questions. On June 15, 2024, while excavating for new foundation supports beneath the convent's library wing, construction worker Tyler James Morrison, no relation to the infamous Pastor Morrison case, struck something with his shovel that was clearly not natural stone or soil. Mr. Aldrich, Tyler called out from the excavation site, his voice carrying an odd note of concern. You need to see this. I think I've found something that shouldn't be down here. Benjamin descended into the excavation area, where Tyler was carefully brushing dirt away from what appeared to be a section of concrete that was much newer than the building's original foundation. The concrete was rough and hastily poured, clearly not part of the original construction or any documented renovation. This looks like someone poured concrete to cover something, Benjamin observed, his contractor's experienced eye recognizing amateur work when he saw it. It's not structural. It's just filling in what looks like it might have been a natural depression or maybe an old root cellar. Tyler continued to clear dirt away from the edges of the concrete section, revealing an area approximately 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and what appeared to be at least 4 feet deep. The concrete was cracked in several places, as if it had been poured over something that had shifted or decomposed over time. Mr. Aldrich, Tyler said quietly, I think we need to call the police. Benjamin immediately contacted Mother Superior Catherine, who hurried to the excavation site with Sister Mary Bernadette Rodriguez, now 84 years old and the only remaining sister who had been present on the night of the twins' disappearance 40 years earlier. When Sister Bernadette saw the concrete section that Tyler had uncovered, she gasped and had to steady herself against Benjamin's arm. Mother Catherine, she whispered, I remember now. In the weeks after the twins disappeared, there was construction work done on this part of the building. Father Whitmore said there had been water damage in the basement, and he arranged for workers to pour new concrete to repair the foundation. Mother Catherine felt her heart racing as the implications became clear. Sister Bernadette, are you saying that Father Whitmore ordered concrete work in this exact location just after the twins disappeared? Yes, Sister Bernadette replied, tears beginning to stream down her aged face. We weren't allowed in this area for several weeks because Father Whitmore said it was dangerous due to the structural repairs. But Mother Catherine, what if it wasn't structural repairs? What if? She couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone present understood what she was suggesting. Benjamin immediately called the Vermont State Police, and within hours, the convent was once again filled with investigators, forensic specialists, and the heavy equipment needed to carefully remove the concrete that had hidden its secrets for 4 decades. Detective Captain Amanda Rose Whitfield, the current lead investigator for the Vermont State Police's Cold Case Unit, had studied the Thornfield twins' disappearance extensively as part of her graduate work in criminal justice. At 39, she was the same age the twins would have been when they vanished, and she had always felt a personal connection to their case. This discovery fits a pattern we've seen in other cold cases, Captain Whitfield explained to Mother Catherine as her team prepared to excavate the concrete section. When someone commits a crime on property they control or have access to, they often bury evidence close to where the crime occurred. If Father Whitmore was responsible for the twins' disappearance, hiding their remains beneath the convent would have been both practical and psychologically satisfying for someone who felt justified in his actions. The excavation proceeded with painstaking care over the course of 3 days. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Victoria and Chamberlain supervised the removal of the concrete and the careful examination of what lay beneath. On the morning of June 18, 2024, her team uncovered the first evidence that confirmed everyone's worst fears and deepest hopes. "We have human remains," Dr. Chamberlain announced quietly to the assembled investigators. 2 complete skeletons, positioned side by side, with what appears to be fabric from religious habits still partially preserved around the bones. Captain Whitfield called Eleanor Thornfield, now 94 years old and living in an assisted care facility in Burlington, Vermont. Eleanor's mind was still sharp despite her advanced age, and she had never stopped hoping that her daughters would someday be found. "Mrs. Thornfield," Captain Whitfield said gently, "we found them. We found Catherine and Margaret." Eleanor's response was a mixture of profound grief and overwhelming relief. "Thank God," she whispered through tears. "After 40 years, my girls are finally coming home." The forensic examination of the remains revealed additional evidence that would prove crucial to understanding what had happened on that September night in 1984. Both skeletons showed signs of blunt force trauma to the skull, suggesting that the twins had been killed by repeated blows to the head. The positioning of the bodies indicated that they had been placed carefully in the grave, not simply dumped. More significantly, investigators found several personal items buried with the twins that provided important clues about their killer's identity and motivation. Sister Mary Catherine's rosary was found clutched in her skeletal fingers, but Sister Mary Margaret's was missing. In its place was a small metal object that forensic examination revealed to be a St. Christopher medal, the patron saint of travelers and a popular protective charm among priests. "The St. Christopher medal is significant," Dr. Chamberlain explained to the investigative team. "It's not something the sisters would have owned, given their commitment to poverty and their focus on prayer rather than devotional objects. This likely belonged to their killer and was either dropped accidentally or left intentionally." Further examination of the medal revealed an engraving on the back, "Father J.W., Ordination 1952. The inscription clearly identified the medal as belonging to Father Jonathan Whitmore, providing the first direct physical evidence linking him to the twins' deaths. Armed with this new evidence, investigators reopened the examination of Father Whitmore's role in the twins' disappearance. Church records revealed that Father Whitmore had indeed arranged for the concrete work in the library foundation, claiming it was necessary to repair water damage that no one else had observed. He had paid for the work himself, telling Mother Superior Teresa that it was his gift to the community. Father Whitmore manipulated everyone's grief and confusion after the twins disappeared, Captain Whitfield observed during a press conference announcing the discovery. While the entire community was focused on searching for the missing sisters, he was arranging to hide their bodies beneath the very building where they had prayed and served for 10 years. The investigation also revealed that Father Whitmore had left St. Teresa of Avila Convent abruptly in November 1984, citing his need to seek treatment for his gambling addiction. Church officials had arranged for him to enter a rehabilitation program in California, where he remained for 6 months before being reassigned to a parish in Oregon. Father Whitmore had died in 1998, taking his secrets to the grave and leaving behind a legacy of violated trust and unanswered questions. But the discovery of the twins' remains and the St. Christopher medal finally provided the evidence that investigators needed to close one of Vermont's most enduring mysteries. Father Jonathan Whitmore killed Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield on the night of September 14, 1984, Captain Whitfield announced during a formal press briefing. "We believe he lured them from their cell under the pretense of discussing Sister Margaret's investigation into financial irregularities. When they threatened to expose his theft and gambling addiction, he killed them both and buried their bodies beneath the convent." The revelation sent shockwaves through the Catholic community in Vermont and beyond. The image of a priest murdering 2 innocent nuns to cover up his financial crimes challenged many people's faith in church authority and the protection that sacred spaces were supposed to provide. But for Eleanor Thornfield and the surviving members of the religious community at St. Teresa of Avila Convent, the discovery brought a sense of closure that had seemed impossible for 40 years. "My daughters died as martyrs," Eleanor declared during a memorial service held at the convent. "They died because they were willing to stand up for truth and justice, even when it put them in danger. Their sacrifice was not in vain. It has exposed corruption and led to changes that will protect future generations of religious sisters." Mother Superior Catherine announced that the convent would establish a memorial garden on the site where the twins' remains had been discovered. The garden would include a shrine dedicated to Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield, honoring their lives of service and their courage in standing up for what was right. "Catherine and Margaret chose truth over safety," Mother Catherine said during the dedication ceremony. "They chose justice over silence. They chose faithfulness to God over loyalty to human authority. Their example continues to inspire us, 40 years later, to live with the same courage and integrity." The Catherine and Margaret Thornfield Foundation, which Eleanor and Robert had established in 1985, announced that it would endow a scholarship program for young women interested in pursuing religious life. The scholarships would specifically support women who demonstrated the kind of moral courage and commitment to justice that had characterized the twins' brief but powerful lives. Dr. Benjamin Aldridge, whose construction work had led to the discovery of the twins' remains, donated his full fee for the renovation project to the foundation. "Finding Catherine and Margaret was more important than any payment," he explained. "Being part of bringing them home to their family and community was the greatest privilege of my career." The formal funeral mass for Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield was celebrated on September 15, 2024, exactly 40 years after their disappearance. The service was held at St. Joseph's Cathedral in Burlington, with hundreds of people in attendance, including church officials, law enforcement personnel, and families from across the country who had been touched by the twins' story. Bishop Matthew Thomas Henderson, who had been ordained just 2 years before the twins' disappearance, delivered the homily. "Catherine and Margaret Thornfield lived their brief lives as beacons of God's love," he said. "They chose to serve the poorest of the poor, to care for the dying, to dedicate themselves completely to prayer and service. When they encountered evil masquerading as righteousness, they chose truth over comfort, justice over silence." He paused, his voice heavy with emotion. "Their death was a tragedy that shook our faith and challenged our understanding of God's protection. But their discovery, 40 years later, reminds us that truth always comes to light, that justice may be delayed but is never denied, and that God's love triumphs even over the deepest darkness." Eleanor Thornfield, now 94 and in a wheelchair but still mentally sharp, was given the honor of placing the first roses on her daughter's caskets. As she touched the simple wooden coffins that would finally lay her children to rest, she whispered words that were heard throughout the cathedral. "Catherine, Margaret, you're finally home. Mama's here, and you're safe now. You were faithful unto death, and now you receive the crown of life that God promised to those who love Him." The twins were buried in the convent cemetery, in a plot that overlooked the garden where they had walked and prayed together for 10 years. Their shared headstone, carved from Vermont granite, bore a simple inscription chosen by Eleanor, "Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield, faithful unto death, September 15, 1984, well done, good and faithful servants." The discovery and burial of the Thornfield twins marked the end of one of Vermont's most enduring mysteries, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in their legacy. Their story of courage, faith, and ultimate sacrifice continued to inspire people from around the world who learned about their lives and deaths. In the years following the discovery, St. Teresa of Avila Convent experienced a renewal of interest from young women considering religious life. Many cited the example of Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret as inspiration for their own spiritual calling, drawn to the idea of living with such complete dedication to God and service to others. The investigation into Father Whitmore's crimes also led to significant reforms in how the Catholic Church handled financial oversight and accountability within religious communities. New policies required multiple levels of approval for financial transactions, regular external audits, and mandatory reporting of any suspected irregularities to diocesan authorities. The Thornfield twins' sacrifice led to changes that will protect countless other religious sisters and brothers, noted Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery, a professor of canon law who studied the case extensively. Their courage in standing up to corruption, even at the cost of their lives, has made religious life safer for future generations. Perhaps most importantly, the resolution of the mystery provided comfort and closure to the hundreds of families who had followed the case over 4 decades. The Catherine and Margaret Thornfield Foundation had grown into a national organization that had helped solve dozens of other missing persons cases and had provided support to thousands of families dealing with similar tragedies. Catherine and Margaret's story proves that no injustice is forgotten by God, reflected Father Michael O'Sullivan Jr., the son of the twins' childhood pastor, who had himself been ordained and assigned to serve at St. Teresa of Avila Convent. Evil may triumph for a season, but truth and justice will always prevail in the end. As the sun set over the Vermont mountains on the evening after the twins' funeral, Mother Superior Catherine stood in the memorial garden that had been built over the site where their remains had been discovered. The autumn air carried the scent of the roses that had been planted in their honor, and the evening bells of the convent chapel played the same hymns that Catherine and Margaret had sung together so many years before. "Sister Catherine, Sister Margaret," she whispered as she knelt beside the small shrine that marked the spot where they had been found, "thank you for showing us what it means to be faithful unto death. Thank you for proving that truth always comes to light, that love is stronger than fear, and that God's justice may be delayed but is never denied." In the distance, the evening star appeared above the mountains, shining like a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. For 40 years, the people who loved Catherine and Margaret Thornfield had looked to that same star and prayed for answers, for justice, for peace. Finally, their prayers had been answered, and 2 faithful servants of God had come home at last. The legacy of Sister Mary Catherine and Sister Mary Margaret Thornfield would continue to inspire future generations of believers, reminding them that even in the darkest circumstances, faith and courage can light the way to truth and justice. Their brief lives and tragic deaths have been transformed into a powerful testimony to the triumph of good over evil, love over hatred, and truth over deception. And in the quiet chapel of St. Teresa of Avila Convent, where their voices had once blended in perfect harmony during evening prayers, the silence now held a different quality, not the emptiness of unanswered questions, but the profound peace that comes when justice is finally served and faithful souls find their eternal rest.